Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, and today on the Roundup we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And one of these questions has gotten more responses on some of the posting this week than most any other topic we've discussed here on the Roundup over the last 3 or 4 years. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. Before we do, though, I want to say where these questions come from each week is from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. And that can be found at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, where we have a list of all of our previous editions of over 6.5 years of midweek of newsletters called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And SMIE, in case you're wondering, is social media and international education. And that's what we feature in the newsletter. Anywhere from 20 to 40 stories each week across social media, AI, webinars, online blogs, different tools that are recommended, to a review of top stories in international education affecting the U.S. international ed market, as well as Solutions Central, where we take a look at some ideas that are popping out in the wide world that might be applicable to what we do here in international ed circles in the U.S., and also a global roundup of what's happening in other destination markets by countries looking to enhance their international education reputation and what we can learn from them in the process. So what we do with the newsletter is that comes out in 2 forms, and either an email version, which if you subscribe at our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe, you'll be able to get that weekly delivered to your inbox, email inbox, 9 a.m. Monday morning, Eastern time. Or if you prefer, you can get the LinkedIn version, and that is available through looking up all the SMIE News Fit to Share. You can subscribe through that. On LinkedIn, if you prefer to get your news there. That comes out about 8:30 every Monday morning Eastern time. Now, between the two versions, we have now over 2,400 subscribers. So honored and humbled that so many of you are making our content through SMIE Consulting a regular part of your international edification each week. So those are the 2 newsletter versions. They provide kind of our quick takes, hot takes on some of the key messages and news stories impacting what we do in international ed. And then we take some of the general themes we see developing in those news stories each week, and then cover them here on Wednesday morning, where we go more in depth, Wednesday afternoon, and go more in depth to how these different questions and the answers to those questions might impact what we do in international ed circles here in the United States. So let's get right to our first question, and it is, should AI tools be used to identify international students breaking the law? Now, for those who haven't been keeping up with what's happening over the last few days, we've heard since the election, since all the rhetoric of the campaign, since all of the anti-Israel protests that were going on in the past year, since October 7th, 2023, when Israel was invaded by Hamas terrorists, the protests that then took off on campuses across the country in support of support first of Palestinians and the desolation of their homeland, to then also include support in some extreme circles within those protest groups, people who were espousing support for Hamas, and that which has been the de facto rulers of Gaza and for more than 2 decades. So what are we to make of that? These protests have been happening. I know I was on campus on a couple of occasions at UNLV, my previous employer, when some of these campuses were happening. Unfortunately, we had mostly peaceful protests there, but some of the rhetoric being used was very inflammatory. It was from the river to the sea, in terms of which is Hamas's view to basically lead to the destruction of Israel. So a lot of that rhetoric and a lot of those catchphrases are straight lines out of Hamas, and that's why some of the students on the fringes there that were advocating support for Hamas in these protests against Israel and what they've done in Gaza, some of them have led to calls from the Trump administration before they were even in office for those if they were found to be guilty of espousing these terrorist views, to if they were students, to have international students, to have their visas revoked and then deported them. That this would also extend, and it has, the case has come this week where a particular student on Columbia, bad week for Columbia University, having $400 million in grants cut from the federal government. Whether that holds up in court's another story. And one of their student activists has been arrested and will be deported because of, as a leader of some of the fringe groups supporting Hamas and advocating for violence. Basically, this is a group that is on the U.S. terrorist list as a recognized designated terrorist organization, and there are laws against U.S. citizens espousing terrorist views. So there are limits to freedom of speech, and that has been upheld by the Supreme Court in court cases in the last few months, in the previous administration. So this is now the students that have fallen into this category are now being, in terms of being accused of support for Hamas, are going to be removed. And this particular one wasn't an international student. He was a green card holder, and he will now, his case will be, already been taken by ICE and is in deportation proceedings. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm sure there are going to be court battles, but this is kind of the start of what will be, many fear, a witch hunt. Whether it will or not is another question, but this administration does tend to stoke the worst fears in people who in this country who value freedoms, and in the name of protecting other freedoms, they're violating some in many people's estimations. So, what's going to happen here? The student has been is in removal proceedings. He's a green card holder. There was a visa student from China that out in California that was arrested and was in deportation proceedings last year. So because of her support of Hamas, and this has been identified as something that is criminal, and in terms of support of a terrorist organization, it's not. There are many colleagues in the business consider it all protected speech, but the state Supreme Court has declared it not. So these students are being removed, and one former international student will be deported if she hasn't already, and another former student who's a green card holder, it will be in the process of deportation. Where he goes, I don't know. But that's certainly something that will be covered quite a bit in the coming weeks and months. But the story that we're going to talk about today is whether social media and in combination with AI can be used to identify students at these protests that have already occurred and may still be occurring across the United States, if those students have broken the law in espousing terrorist views and in their support of Hamas, if they supported Hamas. Now, clearly there's a distinction, and I would make this distinction as well, between students that are pro-Palestinian in terms of support for the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza. It's impossible for your heart not to go out to them and seeing the pictures and videos of what's happened to Gaza, and the complete destruction of that territory. It's devastating, and people should be protesting for the Palestinian people, that they have a chance at a future life that's better than what they've had. it can't get any worse, right? Under what is left of Gaza, which is a pile of rubble. So what can be done? So with them, and so it's hard not to be sympathetic to that cause, is what I'm saying. But there are lines that cannot be crossed, and lines that are crossed that involve support of terrorist organizations and support for them in terms of what is espoused. That is no longer protected speech in the eyes of the Supreme Court, and that has been upheld. So students that are identified that have been espousing these views, and whether AI can be the tool is, and here's the question here, whether AI can be the tool that analyzes whether it's lip reading or whatever, analyzes social media posts, video content that has been generated over the last couple of years while these protests were happening. What is that a valid way to identify students who might be supporting terrorist organizations like Hamas or espousing those views? So it's called, what is the plan from the U.S. State Department to use AI to review social media of foreign students with visas, is called their Catch and Revoke initiative. And it's part of an extension of President Trump's executive orders that civil rights organizations are already challenging whether AI can accurately assess nuanced political speech, and whether it is indeed demonstrating support of terrorist organizations like Hamas. So the articles have been popping up all over the place the last few days, and what is this going to do? And a general summary is provided in this Times of India article. Interesting that that's popping up there. The AI system will analyze posts on platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to detect any content that suggests support for Hamas. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized the U.S. has zero tolerance for foreign visitors who support terrorists, and that violators of U.S. law, including U.S. international students, could face visa denial, revocation, and deportation. So that is all what's possible in the next weeks and months. So that's what the State Department is planning to do. Sure, there's details that are yet to be worked out there, but that sounds pretty ominous. And certainly students who, even abroad, who might be applying for visas to come to the U.S., if there's video content of them espousing Hamas support, then as opposed to support for Palestinian people in Gaza, then the potential exists that they would be also denied visas to even get in, let alone those that are already here that might already be protesting. So we'll see what happens with this one, but it is a thorny issue to be sure, and one that is not going to be answered quickly, but one that will require, and there'll be court challenges to the first students like this one from Columbia University that will be taken quite seriously. So we'll see what happens with that, but we'll keep you posted. My personal opinion is it's a pretty generative AI is only as good as the information that's fed into it, because that's what machine learning is. AI learns from repeated input of data, and there's trial and error, there are mistakes made, and you don't want to be the student who gets caught up in mistakes. But there will be court cases. There will be damage done to those who espoused, who were involved in these even peaceful protests. Any that turn violent, then there's other legal challenges that could be involved that would make a student's visa be grounds for revocation anyway, because that technically you can, as an international student, if you violate U.S. law, any law, drunk driving, if you're convicted of that, if it's vehicular manslaughter, any felony crime, even some misdemeanors, I think. But those kind of crimes are considered violations of U.S. law and can get a student deported if they're tried and convicted. And whether that extends to now analyzing what they've said at rallies, at protests, then that's the legal question that needs to be answered. My guess is the current makeup of the Supreme Court would not look favorably on these kind of freedom of speech challenges. That would be more supportive of administration who's removing those with terrorist views, those that are supporting terrorist organizations from the country as legal. So, I mean, I'm sorry. I don't want to admit students to the country who are going to be espousing terrorist views. That's my personal opinion. I think the government's well within its rights to actively remove students who are. That could be the same whether they're international students or some that have come across the border in the last 4 years that have nefarious plans that could be involved with criminal organizations. But international students in general have done it right. And the 99% of them are well above board in everything that they've done. And they know that because they're the most monitored group of non-immigrants in our country. The challenge will be on campus to educate our students as to encourage them not to get involved in these kinds of protests that cause them to potentially cross any lines that might be there. And that's something that's a sad state of affairs, but better to be safe than sorry, right? And this is something that's just a new reality that currently on campus, we're dealing with that every day on our campus at the University of Akron. We're dealing with educating our international students on some of the challenges that they're facing. What do you do if an ICE agent comes up, and keeping your documents with you at all times so that you can quickly validate who you are. And that's something that you wouldn't have had to done 10 years ago, but now we do. So this is it's not a great message to be conveying to our current students, but it's something we should be doing to protect them. It's in their best interest, right? So that's the first question of the day. We'll get into the second one here in a minute, and that is the evidence there to support the need for greater diversification in our recruitment efforts? And this, for any of you who've watched the Midweek Roundup or listened to us for the last 6 years, you know that's something we talk about regularly here. About when we're putting together international student recruitment plans, how do we deal with that? We focus on diverse markets, not just where all eggs in a couple baskets, like India and China. We talk about in the news stories we share each week. These are things that are regular pieces of news coverage and questions that we answer here on the Roundup. So what prompted this question this week is a new ICEF Monitor article from a British Council analysis called 5 Trends to Watch for 2025 that was released in the last couple weeks. It looks at softening student numbers from China and India this year. And that's worldwide, not just to the U.S. That argues educators will need to extend recruiting efforts across a larger number of sending markets in order to offset that projected near-term downturn. Now, all my colleagues on the ground in India have shared that this last fall was a significant drop, 40% reduction in Indian student visas to the United States. And other markets saw drops as well. We probably saw, apart from Canada, probably saw the greatest drop. We might have seen a greater drop than they did. But there was also a downturn in Chinese visas approved, about 10% as well. So those two markets have cooled. Largest two countries in the world, right? They're together over 50% of international students in the United States are from those two countries. And we've become heavily dependent on them. Not quite as dependent as other major destination markets. India, China have also become top sources in Australia, Canada, UK, other key markets. So we're not alone there. So what does the global softening of outbound students from those two countries mean? It means that everybody else is seeing either declines, and there's a whole host of reasons why these declines are happening, particularly from India and China, but it may be different. It's different from each country. Canada has the deterioration of political relationships with India. It has the new immigration regulations that kicked in the last couple of years to reduce numbers. It's a very different scenario than what the UK has. Their biggest downturn in India was due to the dependent study visa ban that was introduced January of 2024. You now have in Australia just an overall downturn, particularly on the vocational side, similarly in Canada, from India to those two countries. So we see there being shifts in terms of in outbound interest from those two countries. The China one isn't as significant a downturn. India was most significant for us. Will that continue? We will not be rebounding to 2023 levels this fall for U.S. from out of India from all of our agent partners on the ground. They suggest that will still be a softening this fall, not as bad as last year, but January will begin a rebound year, January 26th. So we're still 2 intakes away from seeing a rebound from India. China is a different story, a little harder to peg. A lot will depend on how warm the relations get between Trump and President Xi in China. So we'll keep our eyes obviously on that. But what are some of the markets that British Council is suggesting folks be going after? Because it's not just the top big four that are becoming stretched. Why are they becoming stretched? Other destination markets in East Asia are becoming more attractive as regional hubs. Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Thailand, even Vietnam. I just came back from a few days in Vietnam, and we see Vietnamese universities starting to attract larger share of international students from Asia. So those regional hubs are becoming more popular as students look to stay closer to home. They're obviously more financially viable and attract a wider range of students when you do that, if you look a bit closer to home. The emphasis in the British Council report is that China is moving away from, as they've built up their undergraduate capacity and capacity in Hong Kong to absorb a lot of their top students. You see their shift moving back towards postgraduate studies. So for master's and doctoral students in the United States, this was the case before the mid-noughties. Graduate students from China had been the number one or the largest driver of Chinese students to us. And that looks to be returning to reality for the coming couple, 3 years or so. So that shift means that our traditional, for over a decade, undergraduate institutions in the U.S. relied on Chinese students to bolster their undergrad numbers. That's no longer the case, so we're having to look in other areas. We're looking in Vietnam. We also did a side trip to Cambodia. We're seeing some potential sparks there. But other Southeast Asian countries are looking to become increased markets for us. We're seeing some scholarship programs in the Middle East coming back onto our radar, or getting onto our radar that hadn't been previously. We're seeing some markets in Latin America start to pop. We've had huge growth in African students coming to our institution, and through some admissions policy changes. But our volume getting through the visa process has been low, so we're focusing on trying to fine-tune those efforts there and work a little bit more closely with those students prior to their visa appointments. But the volume is pretty significant that we're seeing in having to diversify. It's been a part of every strategy I've ever developed, going back to 2005, when putting together pieces of an international student enrollment plan. Having the capacity to look in different markets and have different tools used to reach certain markets. That a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. That having a digital-only platform isn't the only solution. You need to have multiple points of contact across many different platforms, in person, online, virtual, whatever it might be. Having that opportunity to keep as many markets active as possible, and that requires a lot of moving parts. Not easy, and certainly if you're a one-person operation, it's next to impossible to manage that on your own. So it's relying on service providers, on partners in country that can help meet the students where they are more directly than you're able to do for the whole world. So yes, absolutely, we need to be diversifying where we're going. Now, last 3 articles that I'll be sharing with you today have to do with our third question. And that is, what do sharper visa denial rates mean for countries, universities, and agents? And there are multiple folks that are going to be impacted by this. That's why I broke this up: countries, universities, and agents. Because the stories that we'll see covered here in an ISEF Monitor report on high study visa refusal rates disrupting the international landscape for education. You see that top destinations have made it increasingly more difficult, that their visa applications have a growing risk of being rejected, that and this is from the ISEF Monitor report, unstable immigration environments are also contributing to student unease and willingness to consider alternate destinations. And we talked about some of those in Southeast Asia, or in East Asia. Major education agency GrowPro has shuttered its doors after, and this is an Australian agency that was had been very significant in recruiting for a university there. Shuttered their doors amid rising visa refusal rates that upended their financial model, where they were now seeing over 50% of their students losing or not getting their visas approved. So the other half of that is what the impact it's having on universities. So countries are seeing that, agencies are seeing that, universities, as a result of these higher visa rate denial rates, are looking to, get this, spend less on international student recruitment in key markets. And this is a Pine News article, and that is coming out of a story that they've senior international figures from Australia, Canada, and the UK have shown much weaker intentions to spend on agent aggregators and digital recruitment platforms in 2024 compared to 2022. And that's a survey of over more than 200 senior operational and strategic leaders. So what those that said they would be spending more on these methods in 2022 was 54%. And now in 2024, that was down to 22%. So quite a significant drop. And the digital platform investments seem to be the biggest hit to these folks. And the cost per click metrics and the overall return on investment from those channels perhaps have been declining without the hand-holding that's really needed to get students over the line for these visas that we're talking about. So there are a lot of rude surprises and shocks down the road, according to a federal, an Australian official at Navitas. So where they're getting really significant choking points from the government in terms of what direction they're being told, and caps that they were going to have put on them in Australia and Canada in terms of study permits for student visas. These are the things that will lead to increased unpredictability in what we do, increased risks. So there are significant challenges that universities are beginning to face in the international student recruitment initiatives. Now, another knock-on effect, talking about companies and agencies like IDP. Obviously, it's much more than an agency. It's the kind of the first global agency that started in Australia back in 1986, just recruiting for Australian universities, but has expanded to 6 or 7 other destination countries now. This first half of fiscal 25 fiscal 25 financial year, they've seen net income fall 46%, and this is after significant drop-offs in students using their services going to their major destination markets. The CEO has shown that there are longer-term growth outlooks ahead, but they have experienced just last week a 16% drop in their share value. And with a multi-billion pound or dollar company like IDP, that has repercussions and reverberations across the international ed marketplace. So we're going to be talking about these subjects for the foreseeable future, but certainly these are ones that will be impacting what we do in the U.S. The AI one certainly is going to have implications for our current students. It's going to affect our image in the world as to how, particularly those that might be sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, can see that their advocacy efforts for them could be misconstrued as support for Hamas. There's that worry that exists. There's the question of diversification, which has always been there, but it's even more relevant today as we see what the current situation is with India and China. And that we need to be aware and of what's happening with these other high visa denial rates. We're facing that the highest rate of visa denials. I think it was 41% last year for the U.S. So that's quite troubling. We'll hope to see an upturn this year, but that all happened on the previous administration. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But there's a lot of nervous folks in our profession in the United States and beyond. And I will be attending the Washington International Education Council conference in DC on GW's campus next month, August 8th and 9th, and April 8th and 9th next month. And I've been asked to give a speech there, and tossing around different ideas for that. But part of that part of the talk will involve kind of responding to the chaos theory approach to governance that we're dealing with with the Trump administration here in the U.S. and what we can do about it practically on our campus. So that's all we have for you today on the Roundup. Thanks for joining in, and we look forward to chatting with you in the weeks to come. Cheers.